Hello everyone, welcome to my biography on my great grandfather's sister's husband, Henry VIII. Let's just get on with it, shall we? On this day, June 28th, 530 years ago in 1491, Henry VIII was born in the Palace of Placentia, which no longer exists since Charles II demolished it, to his father, the conqueror and tax maniac Henry VII, and to his mother, Elizabeth of York, who only seemed to be his mother since Henry VII wanted to use her as a political tool since he wanted people to accept him as king because of the tensions between the Yorkists and Lancastrians in the War of the Roses. Anyways, Henry VIII would spend his early childhood in the Palace of Placentia. Speaking of his childhood, over the next decade, Henry VIII, who at this time looked like a decomposing potato, would live a lavish childhood life. He would learn English, Latin, and Greek for some reason. Plus, he would go to rich people's school, sleep in the afternoon because he was lazy, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already drinking alcohol and gambling. Plus, he hated work and school. He was truly a royal screwball. In 1501, his brother, Prince Arthur, married Catherine of Aragon and promptly sweated to death just a year later in 1502. This made Henry the heir presumptive to the English throne. On April 21st, 1509, Henry's father, Henry VII, dropped dead after tuberculosis knocked at his door. And so, on June 24th, 1509, Henry was coronated and later crowned as Henry VIII, King of England. Henry VIII, by the grace of God, King of England and France, defender of the faith and Lord of Ireland. Henry's first act as king was to behead 2 ministers for high treason. We're off to a great start. 2 weeks earlier, on June 11th, Henry VIII married his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who was his brother's widow. In 1513, Henry traveled to France since he was fighting a war there. He returned to England in 1516 to discover a whore. His wife gave birth to a girl, Mary, who would later become Mary I. Over the next 20 years, Henry would continue fighting France and begin not liking his wife. And so, he divorced Catherine of Aragon despite already having married Anne Boleyn in January of 1533. This means, technically, Henry had 2 wives for a time, making him briefly polygamous. The next year, Henry would establish the Church of England since the Pope initially denied his divorce request when he asked him politely. Not. The same year, Anne gave birth to a girl, Elizabeth, who would become Elizabeth I, which I totally made a biography on, hint hint. And Henry would later be exposed, recently, to have said that he wanted to, from a letter to Anne Boleyn, kiss her pretty duckies. Henry, you nasty. Henry possibly wrote Greensleeves for Anne Boleyn too. And Henry would, over the next 3 years, grow suspicious of Anne Boleyn, since she was having numerous affairs, not like he wasn't having about 5, and since Jane was making jokes about his, let's just call it his manhood. And so, he had Anne Boleyn executed on May 19th, 1536. On May 30th, 1536, Henry VIII married his third wife, Jane Seymour, who I'm directly descended through via her brother, making her my 14th great-aunt. After crushing a rebellion in northern England, Henry was ecstatic when he learned Jane gave birth to something he wanted, a boy, who would become Edward VI. Tragically, Jane Seymour, who became his favorite wife, died a few weeks later on October 24th, 1537, after complications from childbirth. Henry was very devastated, so he began thinking about who to marry next, blew up and looted some monasteries, and decided to marry his fourth wife on January 6, 1540. That person was Anne of Cleves. After thinking she looked ugly after meeting her, Henry divorced her 6 months later on July 9, 1540. Plus, he executed Thomas Cromwell, his former chief minister who looks like a frog. On July 28, 1540, Henry married his fifth wife, Catherine Howard, who was 19. Henry was almost 50. Over the next few years, Henry's health began heading south, leading to his legs leaking gross green bodily fluids. He forced his personal doctor to declare that he was a, quote, exquisite specimen of a man. Sure. Later, Henry found out that Catherine Howard was having an affair with Thomas Culpeper, and so he had Thomas executed on December 10th, 1541, and later executed his wife, Catherine Howard, for adultery on February 13th, 1542. A year later, in 1543, Henry married his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr. Catherine reportedly was very kind to Henry, which he didn't really care about. In 1544, Henry's health was really bad. It took 4 people to mount him on a horse since he was over 250 pounds. And so, Henry's dying wish was to kill some French people. And so, he went to France and took a castle, which France would later take back, and he bankrupted England. After, Henry returned to England, where it looked like his best days were past. On the cold day of January 28, 1547, at the Palace of Whitehall, Henry VIII laid in his bed surrounded by his wife and staff. He then reportedly said, "I trust in the merits of Christ. All is lost." Monks, and then died of morbid obesity, survived by his final wife, Catherine Parr. With a final body circumference of 54 inches or 140 centimeters, weighing almost 400 pounds, 6 women who had their lives either ruined or ended, a shattered religion, 57,000 executed people, and as many as 24 affairs. Henry VIII changed the course of world history in a largely negative way. Nonetheless, the influence of Henry VIII will remain. And with that was my biography on one of the most famous and arguably worst kings in history, Henry VIII. He did a lot of terrible things, and it's understandable why he's called the worst monarch in history. Anyways, my next video will be a history on the Battle of Gettysburg. It will come out on July 1st. Thanks for watching.